church had windows without shades. I was also reassured that this is Britain, and of course it will be cloudy and probably raining. So of course, the devil has made sure that it's a glorious Saturday here. We fooled him. The rest of this part of London, the rest of this part of England is having glorious weather just to fool us. So what I'm going to do is actually shift a little bit from the original plan I had. Not yet. No, okay. All right. Originally, the idea was that I was going to have two talks. The first one, a series of beautiful images of planets and other space objects, which would be projected behind here. We showed a couple of them. You can see them, but they're rather faded because of all the starlight. We can still do that. We can give that a try. But I thought instead what I might do is show a few of them, show a short film, and then I'll just give you some stories about the Vatican Observatory, hoping that during the process you'll be inspired for questions. We'll break for lunch. Please, lots of people write questions, and I'll do the second hour just as a question and answer, because I don't think showing pictures is really going to be particularly useful. You know, we're cursed with this terrible weather, what can we do? But I do want to at least start, let's see if I can make this work, with a short film and a couple of quotes that I think are relevant whether or not you see all the pretty pictures. The first is something from G.K. Chesterton, Orthodoxy, one of my favorite of his books. Unfortunately, he wrote it more than 100 years ago, 110 years ago, and it's full of all sorts of references to the politics of the day, which are apparently just as crazy then as they are now, but also just as indecipherable. And he never uses one example when 5 will do. So I've actually condensed it to give out to students. It's about half the length, but it keeps all the jokes. It also keeps all of the odd things that he says that make you scratch your head. And at one point he goes, the Earth is so very large and the cosmos so very small. The cosmos is about the smallest hole that a man can hide his head in. What in the world is he talking about? Of course he's doing this deliberately to make you stop and think, what is he talking about? What I think is important is to remember the connection and maybe the difference between what is actually here that we walk around and what's in our head that interprets what's here and how we walk around. If you do computers, it's like we all have an operating system that accepts the same dits and das and creates different pictures based on what we're expecting to see, what we're hoping to see, what we think the universe is all going to be about. So that you probably, this being election season, you probably have friends of a different party. And you will be looking at exactly the same problems and exactly the same data. And your friend will say, you see, I was right all along. And you're going, but no, it's you interpret what you see in the light of what you already expect. That cosmology that we carry around inside our heads can give us a way of making sense of the universe, but it can also limit the sense of the universe that we have. That cosmology, in a large part, comes to us from astronomy. And the way that we do astronomy is also based on the cosmology that we have, the assumptions we have about the universe. I know a lot of people who think that the Vatican has an observatory to look for God. It doesn't work that way. Both science and religion are conversations about the universe. They're ways of learning how we interact with this universe. It's not simply a question of is there a God, but there is a God, now what do we do? It's not just a question of there are a bunch of stars, but rather, okay, so you can see the problem. Both science and religion are conversations about the universe. They're ways of learning how we interact with this universe. It's not simply a question of is there a God, but there is a God, now what do we do? It's not just a question of there are a bunch of stars, but rather, why are there stars? How do they work? How does that tell us how things work here on Earth? The interaction that I see in my own life is that religion gives me the reason to do the science.
Back in the papacy before Francis was Benedict, and one of his lines in a final elocution to the fathers of the general congregation was, "Go to the frontiers." Well, there isn't much more frontier than 3.7 billion years away.
The first official interest of the Church for astronomy started in 1582 with the reform of the calendar. Then in 1891, Pope Leo XIII wanted to have an observatory to show that the Church is not against science, but the Church promotes good science.
They start out by having telescopes on the Tower of the Winds, and then on the walls surrounding the Vatican, as the city lights grow, and as the Italian government gives them back the territory out in Castel Gandolfo. In the 30s, they built new telescopes on the roof of the Papal Palace in Castel Gandolfo, best telescopes of their era in the 1930s. By the 1980s, light pollution makes those telescopes unusable, so we built a new telescope in the dark skies of Arizona.
I'm Father Jean-Baptiste Kikwaya Eluo. I'm working in 3 projects. The first one is NEOS, Near Earth Object. So what I'm doing with NEOS is just observe them using our modern telescope VAT. The second project is meteors. I worked on very faint meteors, what we call shooting stars. And the third project is set fireball network. They will have 4 cameras here around Tucson so that we can monitor any fireball getting into the Earth atmosphere in the region.
This telescope, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, it was the first of the new technology telescopes that has been considered pretty much the norm now in developing telescopes. With the advance of computer technology, we have the capability of bringing that advanced technology directly into our telescope. So it's an expandable, it's almost like it's a living machine, so it can grow as technology grows.
It is still very important to maintain scientific research in the Vatican, simply because there is still a lot of confusion about this relationship between science and faith. We are not out here trying to prove the existence of God by looking through a telescope. That's not what we're doing. But we can say that if we want to obtain any reasonable results looking through that telescope, we need to do it embracing a certain work ethics that is, in fact, the same work ethics that the Bible itself tells us through commandments and through the Gospels to embrace.
Human beings look at the stars and wonder. They want to know, what is that? What is that about? How do I fit in? They hear about the moon landing and they want to know, what was that like? If we're part of the human race, we're part of the race that went to the moon. We're part of the species that looked at the stars and went, what the heck are those things? Looking at the sky reminds you that there's more to the universe than what's for lunch. What's more, if you believe in a universe that God so loved that he sent his son, then not only are you going to want to study the universe because it's kind of cool, it's an act of worship. It's an act of getting closer to the Creator and getting closer to a universe, as St. Athanasius said 1,500 years ago, was cleansed and quickened by the Incarnation. Then, doing science is an act of worship. I guess you can see the problem we have with looking at pictures of dark objects in the sky and tiny dots of light. So I will turn off the projector, let it cool down, and basically tell you a few stories that I think probably I'll try to create in your head the pictures that you didn't see here. First image. About 10 years ago, the two colleagues I work with and I got time to use the largest telescope in the world in Hawaii, the Keck telescope, 10 meters across. And to use the Keck telescope, they will pay your way out there once they've decided your project is worth doing. They pay you to go there. So, we get on a plane, we fly to Hawaii. Then you don't actually go to the top of the mountain because the telescope is at 5,000 meters. There's not a whole lot of air up there. It takes about a week to get acclimated. And if you've only got one night, you're not going to have time to do that. So they have professionals up there who steer the telescope, and you talk to them through this dedicated link that you're down in a building down the side of the mountain and they're up there. So we get to the building where we're going to be controlling the telescope. We tell them we're here, we're ready to go up for the night, and they said, we're not opening the telescope up tonight. We flew all the way. It's snowing here. It's snowing in Hawaii. It happens. We drew straws. One person stayed up to make sure that they didn't open in the light of the night. They didn't. The next morning, I wake up, and I suddenly realize it's Sunday morning. And I'm a good Catholic boy. I'm a brother, I'm not a priest. It means I can't roll out of bed and say Mass for myself. Which is, all my friends say, why didn't you get ordained? We wouldn't have to. No, that's not the real reason to do ordination. But so I look up on the internet. I'm in this little village in Hawaii. They must have a church. Of course, Mass at 8:30. So I go into the Mass. But of course, half the congregation are tourists, because it's Hawaii. And the pastor gets up. And he says, do we have any visitors here today? Stand up and, oh, and you're from England, that's marvelous. And you're from California, and everybody announces where they're from. And at the end of the line, I'm the last person to get up, and I tell them the truth. Hi, I'm an observer from the Vatican. Why does the Vatican have observers? And that's part of why I want to sort of describe that thing. I showed that film, which even if you couldn't see the pictures, you had a little bit of our history. You had a little bit of the sense that we've been doing astronomy for a long time. We did astronomy to help determine the calendar and reform the calendar, and that's a whole long story. And I can give you the short answer that in 1891, Pope Leo XIII established the Vatican Observatory so that the world will know that the Church supports science. Why did the world ever doubt that? That's a good question. But I think there's something deeper going on, and I'll come back to that question. I'll come back to the politics that was going on in 1891. But I want first to remind you why anybody does science. The question isn't only why does the church pay out money to do science, why does your government pay out money to do science? Why does the US government do this? The US government dedicates 0.5% of its total budget to go to NASA to build spacecraft. The Vatican city-state dedicates 0.5% of its budget. Unfortunately, it's a lot smaller budget. Why do we do that at all? I had to face that question as a young man. I was a postdoctoral fellow at MIT. I was at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which one of the papers here is recently rated as the highest school in the world, which how can I deny it, except of course I was 50 years ago. Big technical school. If I'm a postdoctoral researcher, I'm an astronomer there, I'm in the big leagues, I'm in the top league. I'm the guy sitting on the bench in the top league, but I'm in the top league. And yet every night I'd lie in bed wondering, why am I doing astronomy when people are starving in the world? And so I quit. I quit my job at MIT. And no, it's not when I entered the Jesuits, it's a few years down the road still. But instead I joined the U.S. Peace Corps. Because I thought, you know, I'm 30 years old, I've got all my debts paid, my family, my parents are in great shape, you know, I'm not going to get married anytime soon, thank you. Why don't I go off and while I can, have adventures and do good? So I joined the U.S. Peace Corps. And I said, I'll go anywhere you want me to go, I'll do anything you ask me to do. And they sent me to Kenya 30 years ago. There'd been a drought in Kenya. Times were tough there. Great, send me in. What can I do to help? And they said, well, we need teachers. I can teach. We need teachers at the high schools. Great. We're going to send you to a high school up in the countryside where there's no windows in the windows and no black on the blackboards, and you'll be teaching them, you know, high school science. Great. 1 week into training, they said, oh, well, maybe we'll send you to a better school, whatever school you want to send me to. By the end of my training, they had sent me to the best high school in the country, and I stayed 2 weeks or 2 months there. When they pulled me out of that high school and had me at the University of Nairobi teaching graduate students astronomy, which I could have been doing back in Boston. Why am I doing this? Part of it was the kids I was teaching were all getting master's degrees in physics so they could teach at the Kenya Science Teachers College. And doing my training and living up country, I had seen an important thing about why there's starvation in Kenya. You know, there's people in Africa, especially in those days up country, would be living close to nature. And there's another phrase for people who live close to nature. It's called hungry. Because even though a technologically sophisticated society has lots of problems, alienation from nature, light pollution, other kinds of pollution, nonetheless, it's the only society that can feed its people on a regular basis. And that's a good thing. I always say that with civilization comes flush toilets and atheism. They're sort of the luxuries you can do when you don't have to worry about what's happening immediately in front of you. And one of those two things is a good thing. Actually, I'd argue that in a sense, a certain kind of atheism isn't bad if it means rejecting false gods. I remind people, I only believe in one God. There's only one more God than Richard Dawkins. And probably the God he doesn't believe in, I don't believe in either. So I'm up there, and I'm discovering that people need to live in a technologically developed society. For that you need an educated populace. For that you need schools. For that you need teachers. And the guys I'm teaching are going to be teaching in the Kenya Science Teachers College. So maybe learning astronomy is a great way of having this practical benefit of learning physics so that people will know how to make the electrical grid system work. That's not why they wanted to learn this stuff. Because I went with the U.S. Peace Corps. I went with a group of about 80 different kids in their 20s and 30s, who were going to be, you know, living everywhere in the country. And every weekend I would go out country, away from the city, away from the light pollution. Because let's face it, I do like to look at the stars. And I had a little telescope.